Maya Mirchandani, who is a foreign affairs anchor at NDTV and one of India's most recognizable faces on television. Maya, over to you.
Right. Thanks, everyone, for having joined us now. I know everyone's had lunch, and so many of you might actually want to snooze, but I promise you that this conversation is going to be quite interesting. We're here to talk about violent extremism on the internet, and we have an extremely interesting panel with us. We have representatives of government, we have representatives from social media, and we have workers in the field. I myself am a journalist and I can tell you my own experience as well, but I'm going to leave it to my panelists to actually make a few small comments. We're looking at a time when the internet, social media in particular, is taking on a greater role very often, especially in urban centers, than mainstream mass media is. And we as journalists in India are confronting that challenge on a daily basis. We have governments who want to communicate via social media. We have the rise of citizen journalists across the country who send in video, who post things online, and they become stories. That's one part of the story. The other part, of course, is the topic at hand, which is violent extremism, and how people are radicalized, how the ideas are disseminated on the internet, and where does that leave us? Where should the checks and balances be? Should there at all actually be any checks and balances? And I'm going to actually go one by one to all of you. Sharik Zafar, if you can just talk about your views on this.
Well, thank you, Maya. And again, it's terrific to be here. And continue the conversation that we started last night. Look, just 5 very quick points, because I think we all agree that we really want to answer your questions. First of all, with respect to that threat, there's no question that terrorist groups are using various internet-based platforms to recruit and radicalize, right? That's not up for debate. They're using it because that's where young people are. A lot of these sites are stable. They're very effective, and they're speaking a language that young people use, using platforms that they use every day. 2, but the internet is not the problem, right? The internet's not the problem. We continue to believe in an open and free, transparent internet. It's those people who misuse, whether they're pedophiles, sexual predators, criminals, or terrorists, right? 3, there is a role for the private sector in determining how users comply with various terms of use. And I think a lot of companies, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, others, deserve credit for removing content that's either ranging from cyberbullying to terrorist content. But 4, we're never going to be able to remove everything. This is the nature of the internet. You know, whether it's the dark web or sites whose servers are based in countries that frankly don't care. We'll never be able to remove everything, which makes me to the 5th point. There is a need for counter narratives, for alternative narratives. But the point is, it's not for governments to lead in this effort. This is an effort that needs to be civil society, community-led, and our job is to support, to convene, right, to inform. But ultimately, it's communities need to lead, not because they're at fault, not because they're to blame, but frankly, we, the international community, need their help.
Okay, Richard Allen, Facebook. I know that you all have challenges on a regular basis about what constitutes freedom of expression, what posts can be abusive, and in some cases, some things that may not be abusive to some are still taken down because they don't comply with certain policy guidelines. Tell us a little bit about your experience as well.
So I think the first thing to say is this stuff is hard, and I don't think any of us fully understands what's happening and what we need to do yet, but we're learning together. And I was brought up in the UK in the 1970s and the 1980s, where we would have terrorist attacks on a regular basis pre-internet. Irish Republicans and indeed extreme left-wing organizations across Europe like Red Army Faction managed to organize shootings and bombings without the benefit of the internet. So this has a long history. Terrorist activity or violent extremist activity has a long history. Having said that, clearly the internet has changed things, and the internet is now a place where people are meeting and where they're organizing. And again, I think it's a mistake. Sometimes we just think of the internet as a whole, and then we think of solutions for the whole of the internet. But the solutions may vary according to which bits of the internet you're talking about. I was actually on Monday in Germany speaking about other kinds of hate speech, in this case, hate speech typically against refugees or migrants to Germany. And the German Justice Minister gave me a quote from the German Constitution. And in the German Constitution, there is a line that says, property entails responsibility. So with property, you acquire a set of responsibility. And I think certainly for the major internet companies like the one I represent, we are very conscious of that we do have a responsibility. And I think there are three primary ways in which we're expressing that responsibility today. But again, contextualizing that we're still learning what it is we need to do. And one of the reasons I wanted to be here and I want to exchange views with people is to understand if there are things we're missing. But the three main things we're doing right now are, firstly, we are taking a really tough line on active support for violent organizations. So we do not want people on our platform to organize violent actions, praise violent actions, praise the organizations that do that. We don't want organizations that exist with a violent mission against society to have any kind of presence on our platform. So that's, if you like, the censorship piece, hard line there. There's a space in the middle, and I think it's the one you referred to, that is much tougher, which is this debate around extremist speech. So speech that may or may not lead to some kind of violent action down the track. And there I think it is much tougher, and frankly, it's really hard for us to define the lines. And that's where we do want to work with government, we want to work with civil society to really understand what's going on. So if you've seen the Demos report that we commissioned that's out this week, that's again part of us trying to understand exactly what's happening across the platforms and in society. And then the final piece, just to say, is the counter-speech piece, where I think yesterday you referred to the need to have grey content. Content tends to be black and white, and in a sense, what you see on social media are the kind of conversations that used to happen in private spaces before social media. Right. So when people gather together.
So the living room has come onto the internet.
The living room has come onto the internet. And a lot of those conversations would have been very dark previously. People would have got together and they would have used hate speech, racist speech, pretty sort of aggressive speech with each other. Now we can see that, and that can be quite shocking.
Right.
But it also provides an opportunity for others to engage with the debate and say, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. The thing you've said about that religious group, it's not right. Very difficult to do, and very difficult to understand where to draw those lines. But that's exactly the debate we want to be in, and why we've been working with partners, including some in this room, to try and figure out how we create that greyness rather than the black and whiteness.
So in a sense, what is being outlined, and we're talking about the challenges when it comes to communication on the internet and thought, speech on the internet. All governments have recognized the need for cybersecurity. I mean, there are cybersecurity cells across the world, across governments. In France, you also have cyber diplomacy. Tell us about the difference between cyber diplomacy and cyber security, and what the government's role then becomes in this space.
Oh, that's I'm going to give you a very pragmatic answer to that question. Cyber diplomacy is a very global and vague concept that enables my authorities to basically give me all the topics that have to be dealt with and that are basically related to internet. So it includes cybersecurity, but also counter-narrative and all that sort of internet governance, relations with ICANN, etc., etc. So that's how we conceive cyber diplomacy.
So in terms of cyber diplomacy, then, given the context of this debate that we're having today on violent extremism, a little bit about your experience and your views on the subject at hand?
Well, it's going to be an easy answer again, because I can only concur with what the two previous speakers have said, and notably yesterday, what you said yesterday. Maybe two exceptions, by the way. I remember yesterday you had a sentence, you said something like, for the young people who are on the verge of radicalization, and you said mostly boys, mostly men. I have to say in France, it's mostly girls, young girls. The last attempt we faced were provoked by 4 very young women who even stabbed the policemen who were trying to arrest them. That's just an important detail. And second, you used the word prerogative to related to the platform when it comes to taking down content. And you, Richard, you just said responsibility. Well, I have to say that according to French law, it is the responsibility, the legal responsibility of the platforms to take down what are considered as illicit contents. And on that, I must say that it has been a bumpy road with you guys. You guys is a very American and I'm French, sorry. So with you, friends. But right now we're in a much favorable position. And I must say that the relations with Google, YouTube, Facebook now, and Twitter at last are really good relations. We need to be very, always cautious about the future because we see problems popping up every time, new problems for you and for us, and we still have to work on that. The thing is, by the way, the fact that we have now a very good relations with your company and the others I just mentioned had a very precise consequence. It's the fact that in France, and probably in some other places of the world, cyber jihadists or terrorists are now organizing themselves through Telegram, And the last, a French priest was murdered back in July in Normandy, and the two terrorists who did that organized themselves, exchanged through Telegram. And this is another problem because I know Richard Allen. We understand who are the two creators of Telegram, but we don't know where they are. And it's difficult to deal with them. It's difficult to impose a rule on them, to impose a law, and that's the next challenge.
Okay, we're going to get back to more on social media, but Munir, I want to come to you as well now because, we're touching on a lot of issues right now. But in the case of Bangladesh, what we saw recently in the Holy Artisan Bakery attack, young, well-educated, internet-savvy men and boys who had been radicalized on the internet, where the internet then became a vehicle for them to commit to a particular kind of ideology. We've seen it in instances across the world, but in your case, Bangladesh having had to deal with that as recently as a few months ago, and the said preacher being somebody who the Indian government is now looking into as well.
Thank you, Maya. And before I go into, let me ask a question to this audience. How many in this audience, occasionally, once in a while, go to and see the videos and other things these extremist outfits put up, the sort of challenges that we're going to talk about? Can you please raise your hand how many people do that? Can you please raise it a little higher? Hardly 6 to 7 persons. That is the crux of the problem. We are here to talk about how to tackle a menace when not even 5% within this room have either seen the menace or knows about the menace. Why? One can be you're too shy to admit that you've seen it, admit it in front of this audience. Second can be you're too scared to go there because someone beyond is keeping a watch on what you download. Either of the two. Neither of them works. Had it worked, we wouldn't be sitting here today. So pause for a while. Think why we hesitate. What's holding us back? Why do you keep on talking about cyber diplomacy, cyber weaponry, and don't even see what kind of weapon we are facing? Now, going to what Maya had said, I look at it two ways, connect and disconnect. Connect is what we are doing here, bringing multi-stakeholder, government, private sector, NGOs, activists, civil society, media, and which is so important. And although not comparable, sometimes I say, one of the reasons why this refugee issue is not being sorted out, because Europe has miserably failed to bring multi-stakeholder in one platform. Luckily, that's not happening in case of cyber and other issues we're talking about. Now, the disconnect part. Maya, you referred to the group of people in Bangladesh who committed this. Yes, we came to a shock. We never before thought well-educated, wealthy, coming from well-established families, going to good schools, can commit such atrocities. So the thing that I would come later on, since these initial remarks, who is the messenger? Who's the carrier of the message? Who's the recipient? Where is the connect and where we are disconnected? That is something we have to ask. Because please remember one thing. We can talk about technology, we can talk about finer nuances, we can debate about it. Trust me, there is no more formidable weapon, take it in right side or wrong side, than a committed, passionate human being. Take it on the right side, you have people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mike Zuckerberg. Take it on the wrong side, you have people like Osama bin Laden and others. So we have to deal with the human component first. I'll come to the technical portion later on when I react to the audience, but that connect-disconnect is the formidable challenge we face. And I'll wrap it up with that. I'm a Muslim, I've been educated in the West, I worked there. I'm a very practicing Muslim as well. I say 5 times a prayer. I don't drink, I don't take porks. I don't think that makes me any less liberal progressive than others who do. So you also have to respect people who are Muslims and whose sensitivity has also respected. I'll give you a simple example. If you know the US election is going on, one of the big issues that has come in the forefront, even when I was looking at the presidential debate, that portion of electorate are upset about some of the things that Donald Trump has been saying. So one of the issues has been blacks, Hispanics, minority, how he has, if minorities can get affected by what a presidential candidate says, if President Obama can cancel an appointment with the Philippine president because of what he says, I as a Muslim have no less right to be hurt if my prophet is undermined, if my religion is unnecessarily put. I will not go out doing the thing that they do, but at the same time, there has to be a fine line between freedom of speech and respect for others. Thank you.
I think that actually sums up pretty much the kind of conversation we're trying to have, because when it comes to cyberspace, the freedom of speech takes on many different kinds of notions, and we'll get back to that in a bit. I mean, some of our earlier panelists have talked about the need for community initiatives as well, community leaders to come on there. Abdul-Hakeem, I want to ask you, you run a computer emergency response unit, or what does that actually mean? What is a computer emergency response?
Well, maybe I could take a slight step backwards.
Yeah.
First of all, I think human experience has shown that it's not technology, finance, and these other things per se that develop societies and human beings, but it's actually correct knowledge or attitude predicated on correct knowledge. And so I think one of the things we forget also is that cyberspace in of itself is not borderless. It may be perceived as borderless to a lot of the end users and to a lot of the bad guys, but at the same time, law enforcement is constrained not only by jurisdiction, but also by laws. And I think there's a quote by Barry Green who says that cyber criminals operate at the speed of light, but law enforcement operates at the speed of law. And there is this disconnect. And I think this is, adds to why law enforcement in particular needs to be much more proactive and think forward. And this now brings us to the OIC Computer Emergency Response Team, which was something that we kicked off back in about 2003. And actually it started as a lunch conversation at Georgetown University, so the benefits of going for a course. And really, it's a group of people who felt that it was necessary and important for the South-South to cooperate. Some of us feel quite strongly that yes, while the West may be our friends, while the West may be able to support us and assist us here and there, at the end of the day, it's for us to do. And I think at the end of the day also, we have to build our own ties within the South-South. So I think this was the underlying drive for the OIC CERT. It was only in 2009 that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation actually took us as an affiliate. And our pecuniary interest in becoming an affiliate of the OIC was to be able to benefit from Islamic Development Bank funding. But at the end of the day, it's about building capacity. It's, again, about trying to be proactive and preemptive. Like I said, law enforcement, for example, can only operate at the speed of law. And if anybody knows the law, it tends to be quite slow. And indeed, I was actually very, very pleasantly surprised yesterday evening to find that there was actually a minister who had kind of like a co-joined mandate, which was not just technology, but also ICTs. And I think that's actually a very interesting model. This is the first time I'm hearing of it, and it's something I will definitely share, when I get back home. Now, I had done a survey many years ago in the enclave of what we now call the northeast of Nigeria, the Boko Haram enclave. And one of the things I discovered was that obviously the problems there have been festering for a while. And nobody really went and asked, especially the young people, what's your problem? What's the issue? And many of us, I myself specifically felt like I think most that it's about poverty. And the results of the study actually surprised me. The number one issue was actually injustice. And it wasn't just simply about legal injustice. It was social injustice and actually religious injustice. Again, this was very surprising to me. Another issue that the young people talked about, and poverty was about number 4, was actually education. And I used to carry out, as I toured the area, I used to carry out a little experiment. When you stop at the gas station to buy fuel, these young kids that are in the madrasas would come to you and, they're basically studying Islam and, you ask them, okay, you want $1. I'll give you $1, but can you recite Fatiha? Now, if you don't know what Fatiha is, it's equivalent, let's say, to the Lord's Prayer or to the Om mantra. And many of these kids who are in a religious institution could not recite those things. So right from a very deep basis, there are some challenges which the cyberspace simply magnifies. And really, one of the things that for me, even amongst what I'd call the city elite, a big problem, even on Facebook, is the crassness of the discussion. The discussions very, very quickly snowball from issues to attacks, to personal attacks. And so I think that there's some things we need to do. Now, finally, in rounding up, what do we do about it? One of the things some of us tried to do in Nigeria was actually to start up an interfaith program, which was actually aired on television and radio. And if I may remind the audience, while we are talking about these sophisticated technologies, cyberspace et al., remember, most of the people at the lower strata of the society, it is actually radio that people communicate with them. So we shouldn't forget those technologies. Right. At the end of the day, like I said, we ran this radio and TV program for about 2 years. And the lesson I drew from it was that when you have a Muslim and a Christian speaking or talking across the table, the lesson was that the Christian wasn't educating the Muslim, nor was the Muslim educating the Christian. Right. It was the Christian educating other Christians and the Muslim educating other Muslims. So I think there's a room for a lot of creativity.
So then again, we're sort of broad-basing this quite a bit. But Richard Allen, I want to come back to you and ask you some questions about, what he's just talked about is the crassness of the dialogue on social media, on Facebook. Even worse, perhaps, is Twitter, which is not as restrictive. How do you compare your engine to something like Twitter, where there is anonymity at the very basic level? I mean, people don't need to identify themselves at all. The language is extremely coarse. That happens on Facebook, but there's unrestricted access. I mean, I can block someone, but only after I know that they've said something to me. I won't be able to restrict their access to my page from earlier. That kind of violence, that kind of abuse, the crassness of language. Again, when I asked you about the guidelines earlier, if you could just elaborate, what are these guidelines you try and push towards your users?
So again, I think it's one area where characterizing the internet as a single domain, I think, is unhelpful. And I think you've correctly identified the fact there are differences. There are some spaces on the internet that are operated by people who are reckless as to the consequences. And I don't think actually that's any of the mainstream services. I'm talking about the kind of way out there spaces.
Yeah.
So there are people who just don't care. I'm going to create a space and anything goes. And then there's a spectrum from there across to, if you like, the safest spaces that are designed for children that have very, very detailed guidelines. Each space, each community, if it's working well and it's successful, should have a very clear identity. The Facebook identity is that we want to be the place where family and friends talk to each other. We do insist on real names and real identity. We're not saying the whole internet has to have real names and real identity, but for our space you do, because we want that sense of accountability for what you say. And I think the reason we have been able to grow so big in part is precisely because of that, because again, most of the time, the vast majority of people who use the service are well behaved. They're well behaved with each other because they're reasonable people, and in part because they're operating under their real identity, and family and friends see what they're saying and can correct them. Where that social correction doesn't take place, and again, I want to be really clear, in the vast majority of cases, people do connect with each other and say, hey, you've just posted something really stupid, son, daughter, brother, sister, friend, you really ought to take it down. I've had that experience, I think a lot of people have that experience, and most of the time that works. When that doesn't work, it then gets escalated to us, and that's where the community guidelines come in. And I guess there are two that are sort of very relevant here. The first is, we are really clear that support for violent organizations or the presence of violent organizations is not permitted. That's broader than a narrow terrorist organization list, because these organizations morph all the time, and Abdul-Hakeem talked about the speed of law. The speed of getting an organization onto the international terrorist list...
It's much faster than the speed of law.
...is like, to get onto the official list is the speed of law. It takes years to get onto the UN list and then years to come off. If we see that an organization has arisen and is behaving in, its primary purpose is violence, then we will prohibit that organization. So that's relevant.
And maybe pass their name along to the UN and other governments.
We wait, they do that thing. There are some issues there, because in some cases, I mentioned earlier Irish republicanism, and there are other contemporary examples. In some cases, expressing support for the cause becomes intertwined with expressing support for a violent organization. That's really challenging. We err on the side of removing the support for the violent organization, and then we sometimes get claims of censorship. It's not okay, to say, for example, I support the cause of people in a particular region of the world, unless you make it clear that you don't support the terrorist organization that may be acting in the name of those people. If you entwine those. So that's one. So and then the other one I think is really relevant is the hate speech standard, where again, the list of protected categories that we have, which are the ones you might expect: race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, gender, etc. Again, speech that attacks members of those classes is prohibited. Speech that attacks the concepts is not. And again, I know this is contentious, and we talked about it earlier. So attacking Islam is okay, attacking Muslims is not. And again, trying to define that line is quite difficult, but we want to have the space for people to speak about the concept, but not to attack the individuals. And again, for some people, they feel attacking the concept is attacking the individual. We recognize that's another point of
There is a very blurred line over there. In fact, Shariq, why don't you come in on this? Because, your role is a special representative of the Muslim communities in the United States. We're talking about broadly, when we look at extremism, when we talk about violence, we talk about terror organizations, the world comes back to its focus on Islam as well. So there's a lot of hate speech, there's a lot of anger. While on the one hand you're dealing with the Zakir Naiks who are indoctrinating young terrorists in Bangladesh, you also have the opposite, where there's this anger against a religion, against a particular community, that becomes a real challenge in terms of security.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I'm the special representative to Muslim communities, but my focus is every country but the United States. So it's global. And look, as Richard said, this is hard. Now, the United States, the system that we have, which differs from our close ally France, our First Amendment makes it very clear that pretty much every speech, even truly awful vitriolic speech, is allowed, because we believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the best way to counter bad speech is more speech and better speech. right? And that means that people say, and they are legally allowed to say truly awful things. The threshold is incredibly high. It has to be very specific, an imminent threat to violence, you know, and it's a very specific category. And this has been litigated through our jurisprudence, and that system works for us because we believe, you know, again, that, you know, people should be, it's as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and our First Amendment, that people should have a right to even be stupid and say hateful things. Now, this is hard because, you know, as Richard talked about, you know, we do believe that there is a role for private companies to monitor their sites and, you know, and take things down. But ultimately, it can be actually counterproductive to ban speech, right? Because, first of all, you can create a martyr out of somebody. You know, somebody who's maybe saying something, all of a sudden a government comes in and bans that. Now, that person is a cause celeb, right? People are now supporting. People may not have never even heard of what he's doing, but now because he's banned, people who may disagree with what he's saying, but believe so strongly in the right to free speech will now end up supporting, right? So it can be actually counterproductive. It can also be counterproductive because in some respects you want idiots to be able to say things out in the open because then you can, you know, denounce them.
Identify the idiots.
Right. You know, but if they go into dark places, dark alleyways, online or offline, then it becomes harder, right? And they're still organizing, they're still collaborating, but it's harder to figure out, right? And finally, when it comes back, you know, people talked about Telegram and other examples of web-based communication platforms that claim to be that are harder to penetrate, that you simply can't monitor, right? So even if Facebook is doing everything and Twitter is doing everything and Google and YouTube are doing everything, the nature of the internet is these things are still going to get out. And so ultimately it comes back to my initial point that there is a need for counter-narratives. Both counter-narratives that against hate speech, whether it's anti-Muslim speech or anti-Christian speech, etc., right? Or whether it's against, you know, counter-narratives and alternative narratives to terrorist propaganda. Ultimately, it's the best way. And so, for example, you've seen awful examples in the United States where someone's, you know, burned the Quran. Now, you know, all civilized people think it's absolutely deplorable to burn anybody's holy book, whether it's, you know, the Bible, the Talmud, the Quran, etc., right? But what you don't see, but there is, you know, the fact that in America you have Muslims, Christians, Jews, other people coming together denouncing that act as private citizens. See, to me, that's much more effective, right, than banning that act, right? Because that person, you know, if you ban that act, some people are going to support him. He's going to become a martyr. He's going to get a lot more attention. Rather, you let the marketplace of ideas respond. You have private citizens come together, and they make it clear that that type of behavior should not be tolerated.
Okay, right. Before I open it up to questions, I'm going to ask David to also come in on this, because when you're identifying people who are responsible for violent speech on the internet, some may be identifiable, some are anonymous. How do governments go around trying to identify and find these individuals who hide behind this cloak of anonymity? It's a huge challenge, isn't it?
Well, yeah, obviously we don't have the same conception of freedom of expression. We don't have this First Amendment you have in the US. And so we have several types of considered illicit hate speech. Like any anti-Semitic speech is illicit. Any anti-Islamic speech is illicit. And then there is a legal cause for taking down the content. Any speech advocating for terrorism is illicit and is now taken down immediately by law enforcement. Meaning, it's a law that has been passed back in 2014 in the context, of course, of terrorism in Paris. And now law enforcement has to block any site advocating for terrorism. So how do we work on that? Well, we've created a platform, digital platform related to the Ministry of the Interior in France, which enables any citizen to notify any content that seems to be illicit. And in a way, it's a preparation for the conversation with you at Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. So in a way, the agents in charge of that platform check the facts, check the legal ground, and then have the conversation, have the relation with Facebook and YouTube and Twitter to make sure that you are alerted, you are aware, and that you can do your due diligence and take it down.
Okay, all right. Munir, you want to respond to what Richard had said, then we're going to...
Yeah, sure. You see, Richard, I was listening carefully. First of all, you outlined some very procedural issues. But trust me, as I was helping our government, these are extremely bright, smart people. And if you look at the simple statistics, of the social media accounts, only 1/5 use English as a medium of language. They are customized to reach out the stakeholder. You block account, they open new account, use hashtags to get reconnected. And something you said, this is not a session on theology, but I can tell you this much. Even someone Western educated, liberated, modern liberal Muslim like me will not take this very lightly. Attacking Islam is okay, attacking Muslims is not okay. And that is where you are fueling the fire. You are equipping IS and others by these kind of statements, not realizing that it has nothing to do with extremism. Let me ask, we have had this issue about extremism Islam. How many Muslims, even extremists, have ever, not to my knowledge, has said anything disrespectful about either Judaism or Christianity or Moses or Christ? So why can't you leave us alone? If we can keep on debating about it, the question is, do you want to be effective or do you want to be technical? We can keep on debating all through the day, have a lot of question answer. Who cares? The people sitting out in some desert in Afghanistan or Iraq, somebody in Palestine, who cares? Who listens? That is the disconnect. And with due respect, this is the kind of statement which fuels the fire. Thank you.
I think to be fair, Richard, you want to respond? Because you did say that that was a blurred line that you all were trying to sort of work around.
And I want to be really clear. Attacking Islam is within the rules for the platform. It can be, so it's not a question of a value judgment, i.e. it's okay from that point of view, but our platform does not prohibit that. I think it's an interesting debate. It's not the first time we've been challenged to say it should be, but at the moment, if you look at the platform, you will find people attacking every religion. It is universal.
But individual attacks are the problem.
But the individual attacks are the problem. Again, this point, I don't think we're at the First Amendment end of the spectrum. Clearly, we do have limitations.
And we're not at the French end of the spectrum either.
But we're not at the French end of the spectrum. It maybe we move into a world where the expectation is that we limit more speech, but right now that feels like the place to be, because there's some really important debates that people are having across communities where criticism of concepts, including religious concepts, is an important part of the debate. So,
okay, all right. Questions? You wanted to, yeah, all right, just one moment, very quickly.
Sorry, I do have to add something to Richard. I think the phraseology, you don't mean attack. Because as a Muslim, I will tell you very bluntly, please attack Muslims all you like. I really couldn't care less. But yes, attacking Islam and attacking the Prophet, But having said that, you see, I think sometimes even we as Muslims allow it to hang out as an Achilles heel. That those who look for a target, because they know we're sensitive, do exploit it. But again, if I may just revert back very quickly, I do think there is much more need for us to be proactive in our thinking. I would leave with this phrase, it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. So I think there's some arcs we need to build.
Prepare for the rain, yeah, okay, all right. There was a question in the, we have 20 minutes, so I'm going to take about 5 questions. The lady right at the back, she had her hand up first, yeah. All right, yeah, both of you had your hands up, so one after the other, go ahead.
Hi, Seda Gürses, University of Leuven and Princeton. I'm a researcher of computer science, and I wanted to talk about the problem of the bad guy. The bad guy is basically now an open door to annulling all democratic process and just kind of saying we're doing something for the bad guy. As a researcher, I have been approached by law enforcement to break the systems that we develop so that bad guys can be caught. And what I'm hearing from now, and I think if you look at Section 230 in the American law, there's no liability after you've taken down something. So I'm wondering, how do you make a system that protects not just the majority, but also the minorities? And that doesn't assume that if you're a bad guy, there are no more rights. And let me just give you an example. If your things are taken down on Facebook or in most of social media, you will not get a response. You will get a response that's very vague, and it's very likely that if there was a mistake that was made, that your content will come back. It will not come back. And there's nothing you can do about it. So by doing this, the social networks are working very well with majorities and very well with governments, but very badly with minorities and with individuals. I wonder how you can rectify that. And
Is
also,
that question for Sharik or for anybody else? Can you specify?
I think definitely for Facebook.
Yeah, okay,
Richard?
Facebook. Facebook has all the questions today. Go ahead, Facebook.
Yeah, actually, so we have a system for policing the content on the site, effectively for receiving reports from individuals and judging them against our standards. Most of the time we get that right. Sometimes we make mistakes. People call us out when we make mistakes, and we apologize for those. But the intention is to apply the rules equally, and we recognize at scale, there are, once you get to a certain amount of scale, the number of people who will feel aggrieved is going to be quite significant, and I'm not minimizing that. But again, what we're trying to do is to enforce those community standards in an equal way. It's not majority-minority, it's about having a set of standards. So the hate speech standards don't protect some minorities and not others, they're applied equally across the piece. You want to come back?
No, I think you're systematically affecting minorities. And I work with multiple countries. Minorities are the ones that are most, as far as I'm concerned, Muslim communities or other communities, they are being systematically affected. So there's a structural problem. How do you address this?
Okay.
Their content does not come back, even if it's unfairly taken down. And how do you deal with this?
Okay, all right, very quickly.
Yeah, in the abstract, this is difficult. At the end of the session, I would love to get some concrete examples. Our intention, is all I can say, is to apply those standards equally. If you have information about particular communities where they don't feel that's the case, then I will talk to you about that after the session.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. It's tempting to follow up on the previous question, but I won't do that. My name is Anja Kovacs. I work with the Internet Democracy Project here in Delhi. We do a lot of work around free speech, so I was very encouraged to hear the emphasis on counter-narratives here, especially from Mr. Zafar, but also from Mr. Allen and Mr. Martineau. I would like you to drill down a little bit more, though, on what exactly works in terms of counter-narrative. And part of the reason I asked that question is because a project on countering violent extremism under Cambridge University recently released a paper that actually showed that counter speech often doesn't work. And as a free speech advocate myself, I obviously would like to believe it always does. But very often we end up speaking only to those who are already converted or sympathetic to our opinions. What that paper argued works better is actually organizing platforms where opposing views will have a discussion with a set of rules that actually make sure that the conversation remains civil. There was also some support for more fact-based material as well as raising awareness, though I think there the challenge is again that facts and awareness generally do not shift people's attitudes. So I was wondering if you can be a bit more concrete about what exactly works, and also for smaller projects, so beyond the Bollywood films that you referred to yesterday.
Okay.
Thank
For any specific...
Mr. Zafar, but if Mr. Allen or Mr. Martineau want to respond as well.
Sharik, then.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. It's a very thoughtful question. I would, first of all, this is hard, right? And so there have been examples, there's reports, there's this excellent Facebook report that talks about that it's very localized, right? And so this is not, the idea of a grand unified theory of counter speech, that doesn't exist, because the radicalization phenomenon is very individualized and very localized, right? And that's a quick aside to talk about Abdul-Hakeem's point that we can't disregard the fact that there's an offline world that's incredibly relevant. And some of the best way to have to counter radicalization, counter violent extremism, is through one-to-one in-person interactions, right? So it can't all be about online. A. B. We find that counter speech can work, but frankly there isn't enough counter speech to we need to continue to do more research, but there simply isn't enough to test all of our assumptions, right? I would like to be at a point where we can say that, if you're weighing victims' narratives, humor, religious arguments, myth busting, familial appeals, other, what have you, that certain things work. But right now, the body, there simply isn't enough. So I would love to have that problem where we have all these different examples of counter speech where we can actually measure what works and what doesn't. I will say though that based on the research I've seen, right, that there are specific examples that do work, but they vary by context, right? And it also it's linked to the fact that why is a particular person, how did he or she go down that path of radicalization? According to our best analysis, we used to think there was it was kind of a linear progress. Now, according to our best analysis, there's 5 basic factors. There's the individual level, the group level. Some kids may not be particularly religious, but because of group dynamics, if one person goes down a bad path, then they all will, right? There's the community level. So communities in Europe may feel that they're second-class citizens. They feel alienated, right? Then there's the ideological level, right? Which could be theology, but it could be left-wing or right-wing or religious. And then there's the socio-political level, which could deal with foreign policy. The challenge for us is that you can have all 5 of these factors and you won't become radicalized. Alternatively, you can have one and you will become radicalized, right? So when you try to develop counter speech, alternative narratives, you have to keep in mind, what are the factors that cause the person to go down the path in the first place, right? It's very individual. But look, let me tell you, the problem that I want to have is that, like we talked about yesterday, we want to get to gray. We want to have such a messy, full, complicated information environment that researchers like you and other researchers can say, well, what's effective is this. We're not there yet. I'm looking forward to having that problem.
Okay, Dave, very quickly. Yeah.
So well, first of all, I want to say that blocking and taking down nasty contents is not enough, and yes, we have to produce or to provoke the production of a good, positive counter-narrative. So that being said, what does work? Well, I don't know, but for sure in France, it's not enough. And yes, it is absolutely sure that civil society is in a better position to produce adequate content than government for all the reasons that you've been presenting yesterday and earlier. So that being said, I think we have to think about the production of counter-narrative as the way we address micro markets. And that's why probably civil society is in a better place than anybody else to produce the right contents for the right people. So I may take an example. If you take the massacre back in July in Nice, when one person driving a truck killed more than 80 persons in Nice. Who could have bet that this man had such a profile? I mean, he was a drug addict, he was a sex addict, he was bisexual, he was coming from Tunisia. It's not the usual type of profile we've seen in past stories or past terrorist attacks. I said earlier that the last coup were perpetrated by teenage girls, mostly converted, by the way. So who can address a teenage girl to try and convince her that she's not on the right path? Probably somebody who looks like her. Other teenage girls.
Yeah.
So that's why we are now much more confident in the ability of civil society to produce the right content. Having said that, and I fully agree with you, we won't brag about that as government, because that would be irresponsible and less than efficient.
So the counter narrative also in a sense comes from within the communities that are creating these. Shivnath Thukral and then Sanjeev Tripathi, and then we'll open the floor. So Shivnath, go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is Shivnath Thukral. I work with Carnegie Endowment. A couple of observations and before a question to Syed Munir Khosrow. I think the usage of the word attack, I think, is a bit misplaced. Criticism or challenge would be better. Attacking is a little out of context, according to me. Secondly, to use, I think we're all in a democracy, so that's the well-accepted fact. In a democracy, you can criticize Hinduism as much as you can criticize Islam. So I would have actually a big problem if Facebook starts censoring stuff. I'm very happy, let it be open. The way Facebook got attacked because they took down the picture of the Vietnamese girl was a good example that I would not want them to have a say. So it's like saying you have a playground, you allow everybody to come in and Facebook owns the playground and you play by the rules. Some people will violate the rules. So the bottom line at the end of the day is just because some minority number of people misbehave, why should the majority pay the price of censorship? So it's a larger debate. If you get religion into it, of course, it'll get into a spin.
Yeah.
So my limited question to you is, why, if you accept democracy, if you accept freedom of speech, unless it breaches law and order, and there are enough American case studies on that, why would you not allow criticism or challenge to any form of religion or any form of thinking in this world?
I mean, thanks. I mean, so you.
I'm going to actually at this point request everyone to keep their questions and their responses brief. Go ahead.
You raised something we can talk all through the day, but time is short. How did India, Pakistan, Bangladesh start? We were one nation 70 years back. Why did we split? Even when I go in Delhi or in Pakistan, I feel we are the same people. Religion. That was not good enough, so Bangladesh split. So we can debate, we can talk about First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, any amendment. The bottom line is, it hurts, it matters. I have full respect for freedom of speech. At the same time, as I raised the first question, are we going to talk about legalities, technicalities, specificities, or are we here to find some solution? That is something you have to ask yourself. We can talk about legal nuances, rights, on and on and on, but I can guarantee you the world will not change. We have to make conscious choices and compromises. What choices, compromises we make, that is something I would like to look forward to the remaining sessions. So I have all respect, but at the same time, I cannot be blindfolded and say there are people who are not that educated, not that savvy, and who get affected. So that's the perspective I was coming from. And I am glad that you also felt that kind of vote doesn't help attack. And time is limited. We can talk after the session, and I'll be more than happy to speak to you on that.
Mr. Tripathi, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Sanjeev Tripathi, retired civil servant with the intelligence background. I think all the panelists agree that this violent extremism or jihadi militancy, we call it radical Islam, has to be countered at the ideological level as well. I think it's more important to counter it at ideological level than militarily. Now, confining ourselves to the internet, you all have been saying, and we all know that there's a lot of many jihadi sites, lot of jihadi propaganda in the internet, where they quote, they justify their actions by quoting from religious books. Many of the progressive Islamic leaders, they condemn their actions, but they do not give counter narrative. I am coming to what counter narrative was suggested, other interpretation to the quotes given by the jihadi elements. There is hardly any website on the internet run by any progressive Muslims which could counter the arguments given by jihadis or jihadi propaganda, so that a young Muslim, when he goes to internet, he does not get indoctrinated because counter narrative is available on the internet. So, and secondly, I agree with Munir that, you know, for any change within religion, it is a war of ideas within Islam. Any outside interference could be counterproductive. It will be counterproductive. So basically, a war of ideas within the Islamic community, what Islam stands for. I mean, they have to decide. There has to be debate among Islamic theologians and outsiders, or in countries like EU and all that. We can encourage them to indulge in that debate, and also encourage progressive Muslims to have websites which can counter the arguments given by jihadis on religious grounds.
Right.
So are we doing something, my question, are we doing something?
Okay,
on
I'm
that?
going to get Richard to respond, but I want to just get Abdul-Hakeem to also come in on this question if he can.
Yes, let me start by saying that I fully agree with you and accept that brute force alone will not kill an ideology, no matter how warped. But I also think that listening to you, clearly you have not appreciated that for every so-called jihadi website that espouses wrong things, I think that there are probably 100 other websites that espouse the right things. One of the challenges I think the Muslim community has is exactly the way you've stated things. Progressive Muslims. It's not about progressive Muslims, it's about being a Muslim. And I think that when you look at people like Hamza Yusuf and Yusuf Estes, these are Americans, they are Muslims, and they espouse many of the values that you would love to see. And they are there. But this challenge that you have brought to the fore is actually much broader than this. And sorry, Richard from Facebook. You see, our colleague from France talked about the tragedy in Nice. And we all recollect how Facebook changed colors in solidarity, quite rightly. But you see, when you have tragedies in Myanmar, tragedies in Palestine, tragedies in Aleppo, very little is done by any of us. And I think this is where the challenge of even the narrative of the last speaker comes to the fore. Because I believe, and I mean, I can tell you for a fact, that even the Organization of Islamic Countries has been doing a lot. But the problem is that it's not getting the kind of traction in the sexy media. And I think this is a big challenge for us as Muslims, but also for the rest of the world. I think you need to also give credit to where positive activities have taken place. And yes, if a Muslim cleric says the right thing, you need to retweet it. And if I may just go back to an earlier question about counter-narratives, it's also very important to understand who is making the counter-narrative. And I think the issue of the young ladies in France and other young ladies talking to them, there are many times that the Muslim leaders that lead on some of these counter-terror narratives actually do not have credibility in their own community. But there are other leaders who, for whatever reason, are not able to be as vocal. And we need to evolve mechanisms that would make those kind of leaders come to the fore. Thank you.
All right, Richard, you want to...
I just want to come back actually on the counter-speech point and Anya's question earlier. So one of the things we've been trying to do as part of our responsibility is to work with civil society organizations who can figure out what works, what doesn't work. It's a period of experimentation. And so we have worked with Adventures Partners, actually worked with State Department and others on something called the Peer-to-Peer Challenge, where we're trying to identify civil society groups who can create content. We're a platform, not a content creator. And actually we have one of them here, if it's okay to invite him to just give us a brief outline of what happened. It's a project in Afghanistan that has been run by the Lal Ul Ana Foundation.
You have about 40 seconds.
About
Go
40
ahead.
seconds.
Stand there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is Dr. Muhammad Mustafa Omid from Afghanistan. We are the winner of the Facebook Global Digital Challenge for the spring 2016. So how many minutes do we have?
40 seconds.
Oh my God. In 40 seconds. So in this program, it's a cooperation and joint effort by the Adventure Partners, State Department, Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs, and also the Facebook, which Mr. Allen's here. So more than 92 countries, for example, in the spring term, joined in the peer-to-peer challenging extremism in order to counter violent or counter massive the ideology of hate and extremism. So our campaign in Afghanistan, the name was Islam Says No to Extremism. So we choose this motto or slogan to show the world, to show this one that there is no any connection of Islam with extremism. And so this is the thing that we want to convey this message. We want to extend this message for the people in order to understand this one. So as the parts of this campaign, we had essay writing competitions from the students. Totally, we collected more than 5,000 essays regarding the extremisms, student counter-message extremism. And also we had a blood donation campaign. We had speech in TV and radio, for example. We reached to more than 5 million people, as stated according to the statistics. And so this one. And so one another thing, the message of the people of Afghanistan, I should use the time. We want the world to have concentration on state-sponsored terrorism. This is what my country is the sacrifice. My country, Afghanistan, so you may think that Afghanistan is a country every time, for example, suicide attacks, different bad things, but it is a country of great promise, a country, an ancient country with 5,000 years story. Once upon a time, it was, when the cities was the mother of the cities, called al-Balad, the Balakh city, or the bride of the cities, a place, the mother of civilizations we can find in Balakh, for example. Afghanistan, I just want you for your research. But regarding this one, Afghanistan now, for example, is a sacrifice of the state-sponsored terrorism. If someone, for example, they have the religious establishments and they are actually supporting the terrorism, religious establishments by teaching the students or teaching, for example, in madrasas, for example. So we need to have the joint effort and collective effort from around the world, whether it's United States of America, whether it's Russia, for example, whether it's India, a global partner for Afghanistan, for example. We really want to thank our Indians for their corporations, Team Narendra Modi, their open society, and also their open democracy.
We're going to have to wrap. Our time's up already. So you want to just make a quick concluding comment because we're out of time.
Okay. My just final speech is this one, that, for example, the peer-to-peer challenging extremism is a joint initiative and is a sample to for the joint efforts of the Facebook, venture partners. It shows us, for example, that the social media, especially the Facebook, is completely in this decision to work with the civil society, with universities, in order to counter message the extremists.
Okay.
Thank you.
So civil society, and I know you all have a lot of questions, but our time's up. We're already about 5 minutes over. So we're going to have to move the panel outside, and I'm sure you all can ask your questions to any of them that you might want to there. I'm so sorry I couldn't take more questions, but I'm bound by my rules as well. Thank you all so much for being such a wonderful audience.